8-year-old Tommy Mitchell pressed his face against the cold metal bars outside Buckingham Palace. His bright blue eyes sparkled with wonder as he watched the tall guards in their red uniforms and black fuzzy hats standing perfectly still. Tommy had autism, and while crowds and loud noises often overwhelmed him, something about these silent guardsmen fascinated him completely. His mother, Sarah, stood behind him, gently holding his shoulders as tourists pushed past them on the busy London sidewalk. This was their third visit to the palace gates this week. Every morning, Tommy would wake up and ask the same question in his sweet, careful voice. "Mummy, can we see the quiet soldiers today?" Sarah's heart ached watching her son. Since his father had passed away 2 years ago, Tommy had struggled even more with social situations and loud environments. The only place he seemed truly calm was here, watching these disciplined guards who never moved, never spoke, and never made sudden gestures that might frighten him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard as the changing of the guard ceremony was about to begin. Tommy didn't know about the ceremony. He just knew his favorite guard, the tall one with kind eyes, would be standing at the right gate post. Tommy had secretly named him Soldier Sam and would wave at him every day, though the guard never acknowledged him. What Tommy and his mother didn't know was that Guardsman James Harrison had indeed noticed the quiet boy who visited every day. During his 18 months of service, James had watched many tourists come and go, but something about this gentle child touched his heart. He could see the pure joy in Tommy's eyes and noticed how the boy's mother looked tired but grateful for these peaceful moments. As the crowds began to gather for the ceremony, James stood at attention, but his thoughts wandered to the small boy who would soon appear at the gates. Today felt different somehow, and James found himself hoping he could somehow acknowledge the child who had brightened his mornings with silent waves and innocent smiles. The ceremony began with the usual precision and pageantry. Tourists raised their phones and cameras, capturing every moment of the traditional ritual. The sound of marching feet and commanding voices filled the air, but Tommy didn't seem bothered by the noise today. He was completely focused on watching his favorite guard. Sarah noticed something different about her son. Usually, Tommy would cover his ears during loud events, but today he stood calmly, his small hands gripping the iron bars as he watched intently. She wondered what had captured his attention so completely. As the new guards marched into position, James caught a glimpse of Tommy in his usual spot. The boy was wearing his favorite blue sweater and had a small toy soldier clutched in his hand. James felt his chest tighten with emotion. He knew the strict rules about maintaining composure and staying in character, but looking at this innocent child made him want to break protocol just once. The commanding officer barked orders and the guards began their precise movements. But James noticed something that made his heart race. Another guard, Corporal David Miller, had also spotted Tommy. David had been serving for 3 years and had heard James mention the special boy who visited every day. Without speaking, the two men exchanged a subtle glance that said everything. As the ceremony continued, more guards became aware of Tommy's presence. Sergeant William Thompson, a 20-year veteran with children of his own, positioned himself where he could see the boy clearly. The word had spread quietly among the unit about the child with special needs who found comfort in their steady presence. The tourists continued taking pictures and chattering excitedly, but the guards had begun to focus on something far more important than the routine ceremony. They were looking at a little boy who saw magic in their stillness and found peace in their silent strength. Today, they realized, was the perfect opportunity to give him something special in return. As the formal ceremony concluded, most tourists began to disperse, chattering about their photos and experiences. But Tommy remained at the gate, content to simply watch the guards settle into their posts. Sarah checked her watch, knowing they should probably head home soon, but she couldn't bear to disturb her son's moment of happiness. James stood at his post, rifle at his side, trying to maintain his professional composure, but every few minutes his eyes would drift toward Tommy, who continued to wave his small hand in gentle greeting. The other guards had taken their positions, and an unusual energy seemed to flow between them. Corporal Miller, stationed near the main entrance, made a decision that would change everything. During a brief moment when the commanding officer was distracted, he caught James's attention with the slightest movement of his eyes. Then, in a gesture so small that only the guards would notice, he gave the tiniest nod toward Tommy. The message was clear, and it spread silently from guard to guard. Sergeant Thompson understood immediately. These men, trained in discipline and protocol, were about to bend the rules for something far more important than military precision. Tommy's mother noticed the guards seemed more relaxed than usual. She had visited enough times to recognize their typical rigid stance, but today something felt different. The atmosphere had shifted from formal ceremony to something warmer, more human. Tommy pressed his face closer to the bars and whispered to his toy soldier, "Look, they're being extra good today." His innocent observation was more accurate than he could have imagined. The guards were indeed being extraordinary, not in their adherence to rules, but in their willingness to show compassion to a child who needed it most. The stage was set for a moment that would be remembered by everyone present, proving that sometimes the most powerful acts of kindness come from the most unexpected places. The moment arrived when Guardsman James made his choice. While maintaining his rigid posture, he allowed the corner of his mouth to curve into the slightest smile. It was so subtle that most people wouldn't notice, but Tommy saw it immediately. The boy's eyes widened with pure delight, and he pressed both hands against the iron bars. "Mummy, did you see?" The quiet soldier smiled at me. Tommy whispered excitedly, his voice filled with wonder. Sarah looked more closely and saw what her son had noticed. There was indeed something different about the guard's expression. Encouraged by James's small gesture, Corporal Miller decided to take things a step further. When Tommy waved his tiny hand, Miller gave the most subtle wave back, just a slight movement of his fingers that could barely be seen. But Tommy saw it, and his face lit up like sunshine breaking through clouds. The ripple effect continued as Sergeant Thompson, watching from his position, slowly turned his head just enough to make eye contact with Tommy and gave him the tiniest nod of acknowledgement. Each gesture was carefully calculated to appear accidental to any superior officers who might be watching, but they were absolutely intentional for the little boy who had captured their hearts. Other tourists began to notice something special was happening. A few people stopped taking selfies and started watching the interaction between the guards and the child. An elderly woman nudged her husband and pointed toward Tommy, smiling at the sweetness of the moment. Tommy's joy was infectious. He began to giggle softly, a sound that seemed to float across the courtyard and touch each guard's heart. For these men who spent their days in serious duty, protecting one of the world's most important buildings, the simple laughter of a child reminded them why their service mattered. The guards had successfully created a magical moment while maintaining their professional dignity, but the best was yet to come. Word of the special interaction had quietly spread among the entire guard unit. Even guards who couldn't see Tommy directly had heard about the remarkable little boy who found such joy in their presence. What happened next would become legendary among the regiment. As Tommy stood at the gate, still clutching his toy soldier, Guardsman James made a decision that would risk his career, but felt absolutely right in his heart. During a moment when no senior officers were in sight, he slowly and deliberately looked directly at Tommy and gave him a proper, unmistakable wink. Tommy's reaction was immediate and beautiful. He squealed with delight and jumped up and down, pressing his whole body against the fence. "Mummy, Mummy." The soldier winked at me. He really did. His excitement was so pure and genuine that even the most serious tourists couldn't help but smile. But the guards weren't finished. Corporal Miller, seeing Tommy's overwhelming happiness, decided to give the boy something even more special. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out one of his brass uniform buttons that had come loose earlier. Looking around to ensure no officers were watching, he carefully rolled the button across the ground toward the fence where Tommy stood. The shiny button came to rest just within Tommy's reach through the iron bars. The boy's eyes grew wide as saucers as he carefully picked up this treasure. "Look, Mummy, the soldier gave me a real guard button." He held it up to catch the sunlight, and it gleamed like gold in his small palm. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched her son experience such pure joy. She had spent 2 years watching Tommy struggle with social interactions and feeling different from other children. But here, these disciplined military men had seen past his differences and recognized the beautiful soul within. The crowd that had gathered was now openly watching and smiling. Several people were recording the moment on their phones, but not in the usual tourist way. They were capturing something genuinely magical happening before their eyes. The final moment of magic came when Sergeant Thompson, the most senior guard present, made a choice that would complete this extraordinary day. He had been watching the entire interaction and felt moved by the kindness his younger colleagues had shown. With decades of military experience behind him, he knew the value of compassion over rigid rule following. As Tommy clutched his precious button and continued to beam with joy, Sergeant Thompson did something unprecedented. He slowly and formally saluted the little boy, holding the gesture long enough for everyone to see. It was a full military salute, given with the same respect he would show to a high-ranking officer. Tommy didn't fully understand the significance of the salute, but he knew it was something very special and important. He stood as straight as his small body could manage and tried to copy the gesture, holding his hand up to his forehead, just like he had seen in movies about soldiers. Thikamwime. Crowd erupted in quiet applause, careful not to disturb the solemnity of the moment. Several people were openly crying, including Sarah, who could hardly believe what these remarkable men had done for her son. In a world that often overlooked or dismissed children with special needs, these guards had seen Tommy's worth and celebrated it publicly. The commanding officer returned to the courtyard just as the interaction was ending. While he noticed the unusual energy in the air, he chose not to investigate too closely. Sometimes, he realized, the most important duty a soldier can perform has nothing to do with following orders and everything to do with following their heart. As Sarah and Tommy finally prepared to leave, the boy pressed the brass button close to his chest and waved goodbye to each guard individually. "Thank you for being my friends," he called out in his sweet voice. "I'll keep your button forever and ever." That evening, Tommy fell asleep clutching the button, and he dreamed of being a brave guard who protected people and made children smile. The guards returned to their quarters knowing they had broken several minor regulations, but they had upheld something far more important: the duty to show kindness to those who need it most. The story of their compassion spread throughout London and eventually around the world, reminding everyone that true strength sometimes means bending the rules to lift up those who need lifting, and that the greatest victories are often won not through perfect discipline, but through perfect love.